Hey, it's Mark Ferguson with Investor More, and today I'm talking about the latest push to ban hedge funds from the housing market. So there were some bills introduced. Lots of people have been talking about this. The news has been talking about it. And as usual, I try and come at this with a different viewpoint and give some numbers and facts that maybe a lot of people haven't seen. So there's so much information out there, some of it good, some of it really, really bad on this debate. In fact, some of the stuff was almost made up, and I'll show you some of the data and how it got published. I'm not sure, and I even got some conversations I had with the people who created that data that I will share with you. And I've got some really important data about the number of rentals we have, especially single-family rentals, that may shock you based on everything you hear in the news. And then we'll talk about this bill and what it actually does. Does it even really target hedge funds? It doesn't. It targets a whole lot more people. So we'll look at that as well. And then we also want to look at affordability issues. The whole point of this bill, which says kick investors out of the housing market to improve affordability. It will probably do the opposite of that. Government regulations, especially in housing, almost always raise prices. Almost always. And this bill will probably do the same, and I'll explain exactly why and how it will actually decrease inventory, which raises prices. Okay, so basically, there's a couple of bills being introduced, but they want to get hedge funds out of the market. They want to stop them from buying houses. They want them to sell the current houses they have. And one of those bills wants them to sell them over the next 10 years. If they don't, they're giving them massive tax penalties for owning these properties. And those tax penalties will go to owner-occupants for down payment assistance so they can buy properties. So really, what you're probably going to end up doing is decreasing supply of housing, because hedge funds are actually building a lot of houses right now, which is increasing supply, but that will probably stop. That will stop. And then you're giving more money to owner occupants to increase demand. So you'll raise demand, lower supply. That equals higher prices. And we'll show you what's happening with single-family rental properties here soon. But that's the gist of one of these bills. And a lot of people think, the government has to get involved. They have to stop things. They have to regulate things. Almost every time that happens, prices go up. It gets harder to buy properties. It gets harder to build, and it makes things worse. So this whole theory is flawed, unfortunately, and I'll show you why. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, we'll get right into the juicy bits of this right now, is how many single-family rentals are there? How many are there being created? Because everything we hear in the news is how hedge funds, investors are buying up all the properties, all the houses are being turned into rentals. We're becoming a renter nation, and it has to be stopped. That's what's pushing up prices. What does the data show us? Well, let's look at single-family rentals first, because I've never seen this data published in any of these articles or online about how many actual single-family rentals there are over time. We've heard there's 14 to 15 million right now. There's 14 to 15 million single-family rentals out of 85 million houses. So about 16% of houses are rental properties. Now that's just houses, just single family. If we look at multifamily apartments, there's way more rentals, of course, because almost none of those are owner occupied if you have a 100-unit apartment building. That's how many rentals there are. So has that gone up significantly over time, or has it been decreasing? This might surprise you. This is a Harvard University document and paper from Alexander Herman, and this is from 2003. This is a very new article, but it uses U.S. Census data for rental properties, and it's only goes up to 2021, which I wish it went, U.S. Census had more data, but I haven't found this data anywhere else. So look at this. Single-family homes have long been an important part of the rental stock, increased significantly following the housing crisis. So what he's talking about, here's 2001, and this red line right here, if you can see it, is the single-family share of rental households. So this is the percent of single-family renter households. So how many single-family renters there are. And it was this is the millions of houses here. This is the percent over here. It was at about 30% in 2001. It's slowly been increasing. And then after the housing crisis, when so many people lost their home to foreclosure, they had to become renters. So people who would normally buy became renters, and this increased up to 35% were single family renters. Now, what happened since that? It's been going down, the percent, significantly since 2013 to 14. This yellow line is the number of total single-family rentals, how many total single-family rentals there are. And you had 10 million, and this has been going, pretty, slightly up before the housing crash. Housing crash hit, way more single-family rentals. Like I said, a lot of people couldn't buy anymore. They would have owned houses. They started renting instead. That peaked in 2016 at about 15.23 million rentals. And since 2016, the number of single-family rentals has been decreasing. And that is while housing stock goes up and the population goes up. So you can see, even with them building more houses, we're adding housing stock, the number of single-family rentals has been decreasing since 2016. We're now at around 14 million from everything I've seen, estimates. So this has continued to go down, while everybody in the news and media tells us how all the single-family homes are being bought up by investors, are all being turned into rentals. No, they're not. They're actually being turned into owner-occupied properties, and lots of data backs this up. All right, I made this video, completed it, and then the US Census responded to my email I sent them and gave me a link to their data, which is awesome. So it doesn't hurt to try to contact some of these people and get information. I'll show that later in the video too. But one thing too, a lot of people might say, oh, you got skin in the game, this is gonna hurt you, this is why you're against this. I don't know, I own 5 single-family rentals. This doesn't hurt me at all. It actually might help me because it'll make my commercial and multifamily properties go up, and I'm more worried about the overall housing market and affordability than I am my own personal investments. And honestly, personally, I'd much rather have lower prices too. I want lower prices. Almost all investors want lower prices. But anyway, so this is data from the US Census. If anybody wants this link, I can send it to you. I'm not sure exactly how I got it, but or how to get here. But they sent me this directly. So what you're looking at right now is 2016 data, and hopefully I'm not blocking it, but basically in 2016, for owner-occupied housing units, there were 61,920,000 single-family detached, 4,372,000 single-family attached, and there were 12,467,000 renter single-family detached, 2,790,000 renter single-family attached. Now, if you put these numbers together, I wrote them down, you get 66,295,000 owner-occupied single-family units, 15,257,000 owner-occupied renter units. Now, it's really cool. We can go to 2022, which is the most recent data. Click on, this is the right one? Now, at least 2022 data, which is the most recent we have, there are 69,613 owner-occupied detached, 5,333,000 owner-occupied attached. So those numbers add up to 74, almost 75 million. In 2016, there was about 66 million. So owner-occupied units have increased by 8 million. And this is just single-family homes, not all units, just single-family attached or detached. So detached would be a single-family house, attached would be like a condo, maybe a townhome, maybe half a duplex that you can sell separately, but it's a single-family home. Renter-occupied, 11,265,000 detached, 2,940,000 attached renter units. So there's 14,204,000 single-family renter-occupied units. In 2016, 15,257,000. There are 1 million less single-family rentals now than in 2016. The single-family rental market is shrinking and decreasing, and that's why rents are going up. We need more single-family rentals. There are way more owner-occupied units. Owner-occupied rates going up. Well, how about all that? We need more rentals. That's a simple fact. And these investors and hedge funds own, we'll show you, about 400 to 500,000 total units. And that doesn't even make up for the loss of single-family units we've had the last 7 years. They aren't even making up that difference. It's crazy what the numbers actually show. And thank you to the US Census for sending this to me. Sorry. Another interesting fact. Right now, single-family rentals make up 15.9% of single-family properties. So that's 14,200,000 divided by 75 million or so. So 15.9% in 2016, 18.7%. There's a 3% difference. There were 3% more single-family rentals in 2016 compared to single-family total properties than there is now. So if we look at Fred data, so this is St. Louis Fred. This also uses U.S. Census data. And this blue graph are owner-occupied units. The red one, renter-occupied units. And we can see how many renters and how many owner-occupants there are, dating all the way back to, this is 2001. So back here in 2001, you had 68 million owner-occupants. You had 33 million renters. And up until the housing crash, owner-occupants increased a lot, as you can see. Renters stayed pretty flat because everybody could buy a house, whether they should or shouldn't. Then the housing crash happened. You saw the owner-occupants actually decrease while renters increased. And then something interesting happened. The number of rental units peaked in 2016. That's right. There are less renter-occupied units today, 7 years later, than in 2016. 44 million renter-occupied units in 2016. Now we're at 44,370,000. So it's really close, almost the same. I think the renter-occupied units went up slightly. What happened to owner-occupied units since that time? Well, you had 74 million owner-occupied units in 2016. Now we have 86 million. So while the renter units have been really steady, about the same, renter or owner-occupied units have increased by 12 million. Owner occupants have increased by 12 million. Renters have stayed the same. This is not becoming a renter's nation. There are not way more rental properties than there used to be. Investors are not destroying the housing market by turning everything into rentals. In fact, the opposite is happening. While housing stock is increasing, rentals are staying the same, which means they're losing ground as a percentage to how many people own homes. And people might say, well, this is wrong data. These people have Airbnbs, or the owner occupants are... No, U.S. Census data is people who live in their house the majority of the time. That's what counts. So the people who own their house, living it the majority of the time, is increasing significantly. And their data shows that in other figures too. We can look at the owner occupancy rate. There we go. Now we've got the right data. This is the home ownership rate in the United States. This is the percentage of households that own the place where they live. So this goes back, way back. 62.9% in 1966, hit a peak of 65.8 in 1980. Then we saw that decrease, probably because interest rates went absolutely bonkers and it made it really hard to buy. Stayed very low while interest rates were low up until 95. Interest rates started to go down. Then the government loosened all the lending restrictions, made it so almost anybody could buy a house, and you saw the owner occupancy rate climb to 69%. And then what happened? Well, we realized maybe a lot of those people shouldn't have been buying houses. They didn't have good credit. They didn't have the income to support it. A lot of them went into foreclosure. Then the rate dropped all the way down to 62 in 2016. The data we've been using. And now, this is a crazy COVID bump. You kind of have to ignore those because this data is skewed all over. In fact, a lot of publications, including Harvard, just stopped using 2020 data because it was so skewed. But now we're at 66% again. So the owner-occupied rate has been increasing from 62, maybe 63 if you want to round up, to 66 the last 7 years. So no, we are not becoming a renter's nation. The opposite is happening. More and more people are buying houses to live in. All right, so I know a lot of people are saying, well, great, how does that help me? And it might not help you, right? A lot of people want lower prices, and they're looking for a reason for lower prices. And unfortunately, banning investors isn't going to lower prices. That's not going to do much to help anything, and I'll show you why. So here's this chart showing the single-family homes. Adam Smith is who introduced one of these bills to stop hedge funds, and yes, they have their stories that tug at your heart. So this act gives us a synopsis. The End Hedge Fund Control of American Homes Act, which they don't control at all, but anyway, seeks to put an end to this harmful practice of hedge funds buying up single-family homes by banning hedge funds from owning these types of homes and requiring them to sell at least 10% of the total number of single-family homes they currently own to families per year over a 10-year period. After a 10-year full phase-out, all hedge funds will be completely banned from owning any single-family homes. Any. So what will that actually do? Well, this is their own fact sheet, their own data we're using. I know I was pointing and you can't really see that, but I promise I was. Let's see here. The fact sheet there, the bill, let me see, imposes an immediate 50% tax on the fair market value of any future purchase of a single family home by hedge fund. So you can't buy any more houses if you're a hedge fund. But what is a hedge fund? Now, a lot of people describe it as an entity that owns more than 1,000 units. In fact, you can see here, large-scale hedge fund investors are taking over the housing market at an alarming and accelerating rate. In 2011, no single entity owned over 1,000 single-family rental units. That would assume to me they're talking about entities that own more than 1,000 units when talking about hedge funds. As of June 22, the Urban Institute estimates that large hedge funds and other institutional investors, notice they included other institutional investors, not just large hedge funds in this number, own 574 single-family homes. That seems crazy, such a massive increase. Remember, there's 85 million homes in the United States. So if we do 574 divided by 85 million, whoops, don't put that dot there. Hedge funds and other large institutional investors own 0.68% of the housing stock. Not even 1%. Not even close to 1% of housing is owned by hedge funds and other large institutional investors, but they're taking over the housing market. All right, predatory hedge funds disproportionately target black families and vulnerable single parents, as revealed in a recent Housing Financial Services Committee report. These investors focus on neighborhoods with larger black populations and approximately 30% more single mothers than the national average. Wow, okay, that's really interesting to know. We're going to use that data against them in just a second. But let's see here. Yeah, the 50% tax, sell off all existing ownership of all single-family homes in 10 years or face significant tax penalties. Each year, over 10 years, large hedge funds will have to sell at least 10% of the total number of single-family homes they own until they own zero, subject to a tax penalty for each single-family home above the minimum allowed value. Tax revenues would be reserved for down payment assistance for people seeking homes. Families and individuals who don't own any residential real estate are eligible for down payment assistance grants funded by the tax penalties. So it only goes to people who don't own houses now, not anybody else. Exempts nonprofit organizations, public housing agencies, and other government entities, and home builders from the taxes. Okay, so I may have missed that before. I don't know if... No, that wouldn't matter. It exempts home builders who are selling to people, but probably not home builders who are building to rent. Includes an explicit certification process for a purchaser to confirm that they do not own a majority interest in any other single-family residential real estate. So what that tells me is every single home purchase from now on includes a certification process to confirm that those people don't own a majority interest in any other single-family homes. So if you thought the home buying process was complicated now, just wait until you have to certify you don't own any other majority interest in any other single-family residence. Now, I don't know if that's just for people using this down payment assistance or if that's supposed to be for everybody. This kind of makes it sound like it's for everybody. Here's the bill text, and this is very important to look at too. Excess single-family residences. Now we really get to see who they're targeting, because remember that 1,000-unit number they used to talk about hedge funds and big institutional investors? Well, let's see what they really mean. The maximum permissible units for a hedge fund taxpayer is 90% of the number of applicable single-family residences owned by the taxpayer on the applicable date. So every year they've got to sell 10% of their houses till they get to zero. The maximum permissible units for any other applicable taxpayer. This is the most units anyone else can have. This isn't just hedge funds, anybody else. 50. That's their limit, is 50, not 1,000, 50. So they're not just targeting hedge funds and institutional investors, they're targeting a lot of investors out there, mom and pops. There's a lot of mom and pops who own more than 50, a lot of smaller corporations that own more than 50, and they have to decrease theirs until they get down to 50, or they will be facing serious tax penalties. Hedge funds have to go down to 0. Regular people can go down to 50. I don't know how they decide what a hedge fund is exactly, but is it all corporations? I'm not sure. Okay, so here we have this certification. So, the reporting required under section yada yada of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as added by subsection A shall include a certification from each individual to whom a single family residence is sold or transferred from an applicable taxpayer. Every single house has to have this certification now. So I think everybody has to do that, but maybe you just sign a document, not sure. So let's look at some other interesting stuff in here. Okay, going back to this report, I want to use their data, because there's a lot of different data on houses being owned by investors and different things. This is the Urban Institute report and what they link to from Adam Smith's website. And it talks about all the single family homes owned by investors. So here's where some of this data comes from. All right, as of June 22, we estimate that large institutional investors own roughly 574,000 single-family homes. We have defined an institutional investor as an entity that owns at least 100 single-family homes. So that's not hedge funds, that's not Wall Street, that's anybody that owns 100 homes. And to put this in perspective, there are 15.1 million rental properties nationwide. So again, there are different estimates on how many rentals there are, but that comes from, we'd have to look down here and see. Number one source, the 2021 American Community Survey. So that is not U.S. Census data, that's something else. That could be why it's slightly off from the data we talked about before. Now, this would suggest total institutional ownership share is 3.8% of all rental properties. Now remember, when you hear that 3%, 4% of houses owned by institutions, that's not all houses, that's just single family rentals. So it's actually, as we showed before, 0.6% of all houses or 3.8% of all single family rentals. The vast majority of owners in the single family market are small and medium investors who own less than 100 properties. There are 46.6 million total rental properties, so one unit properties make up 32% of the total rental stock. So that first chart I was showing you that showed single families going down, what that means is the share of rental properties. So there's 46.6 million rentals. The number of those rentals that are single family homes has been going down, not up. So renters are actually getting more apartments, moving into more apartments, and moving into fewer houses, total and percentage wise. So there's other things this goes through, like there's some charts that show 20 million homes are owned, are single family rental properties. But they also show that there's way more investors own properties. Some research uses people who own more than 15 houses as institutional investors. That's why the numbers will range so differently. Now, this also goes to show us what mega investors own. And they define that as more than 1,000 units owned, which is what that bill, said was more than 1,000 units, but then they changed it to something else for the next number. This estimates 446,000 properties are owned by hedge funds that have more than 1,000 properties, or institutional investors that have more than 1,000, I should say, single family homes. So 446,000 is their estimate. So about 0.5% of houses are owned by hedge funds or mega investors, which is who all these people say they're targeting. They all say they're targeting hedge funds and mega investors, not mom and pops, not these smaller corporate ones. So they own 0.5% of all housing. Now, what's also interesting about this data is, the 574,000 property figure. This is how it's broken down. So 77% are mega investors, 3% smaller investors long-term, 4% local investors long-term, trusts, flippers. They include flippers in that number, who are obviously selling houses, most likely to owner-occupants, builders, government agencies, servicer, a loan servicer, property into foreclosure, nonprofit. So that whole number isn't even all rental properties. It includes flips, builders, all kinds of different figures in that. But the 446,000 number, and from what I've read from many different sources, it's around 400,000 homes that are owned by large hedge funds. That's the number. And when you see this, 15 million rentals are owned by hedge funds, 15% of properties are being bought by hedge funds. When you see those numbers, they include all investors. And they always say that. They say, just like that other bill said, we can see the, we have to go back, which is okay. We can do that. Their wording, right? Their wording right here estimates that large hedge funds and other institutional investors, which they don't define, own 574,000. Well, a lot of those other articles you see say large hedge fund investors and other investors. They don't even limit it. They include every investor in that, including small mom and pop. So you have to be so careful about what data you look at. All right, this is an article from CoreLogic. Small investors chose to sell properties rather than rent them during the pandemic. Now, this is very misleading. Almost every headline now is misleading. This is for all investors, not just small investors. 50% more rental properties exited the market than were added in 2021. 2021 was supposed to be this year that everything was bought. 50% more were sold than bought, which means owner-occupants were buying more and rentals were becoming owner-occupied properties, and that's why the rental stock was decreasing. And you can see their chart right here. Never mind. That chart is for home price growth and interest rates. Here is rental stock flow. Rental property gain is blue. Rental property loss is orange. So we can see 2015 actually had a big gain of rental properties and a loss. There's a big difference. More rental properties were hitting the market. 2017, we crossed that line, and we still stayed above, sorry. 2020, we crossed the line, and then we had a huge sell-off in rental properties. I sold rentals too because prices went up. I couldn't cash flow. Rents weren't high enough for the price and equity I had, so I sold them. I bought more multifamily and commercial properties. Yes, there was an increase in rental property gain and purchases. You can see that increase here. And there was a slight decrease in selling, but still a massive difference between the two. And this is why there's fewer rental properties now, because investors were selling way more than they were buying. So it's so important to look at the big picture, all the numbers, and not just read headlines and small snippets and percentages when you don't see what the context is of all of it. Investors have been selling more than they're buying. There's a shortage of rentals right now, just like there's a shortage of owner-occupant housing. There's a shortage of housing in general for everyone. And rents have been increasing so much because there's a huge shortage in rentals, especially single-family rentals, because when we look at this report right here, we can see the total number of single-family rentals is decreasing, not increasing like they'd want you to have. It's decreasing, which means rents are going to go up for those houses. And something else that's interesting, we noticed that article had mentioned hedge funds target black families and single moms. I'm not sure exactly how they came up with that, but credit scores. These are credit scores for majority black and Hispanic communities have lower median credit scores. I didn't come up with this data. This is from the Urban Institute as well. But if you're looking at majority black, majority Hispanic, majority white, blacks, Hispanics tend to have lower credit scores. Now, Asians blow all of us out of the water with higher credit scores. That's not included here. But you can see from different age groups, in general, they have lower credit scores. Lower credit scores makes it much harder to buy houses. Whether you like the credit system or not, I'm not here to argue that. That's a reality. That's a fact we have to deal with. That means it's much harder for minorities who are black or Hispanic to buy houses if they have a lower credit score. That means if they want to live in a house, they might need to rent. And if you ban single family rentals, which is kind of what this is trying to do, not all the way, but if you ban large investors from owning single family rentals and from buying any more, that means single family rentals are going to keep decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. It's going to make it harder and harder for minorities to have a house and live in a neighborhood unless they buy it. So in essence, this could be hurting the minority community a lot more than it's helping it. And people who can't rent, no matter what race they are, or people who can't buy, no matter what race they are going to have a much harder time being in a house, having a house, because there won't be as many single family rentals, and we need more single family rentals because you saw the share and percentages going down so much. And we had all of these housing, how Fair Housing Acts enacted, FHA enacted to stop redlining, technically FHA redlined back in the 40s when it started. That was changed. That was a horrible thing, but that was changed. But now we're trying to stop that. We're trying to make it, more equal, inclusive, all of that. Well, this bill will actually make it harder for minorities to live in houses and neighborhoods. It will send them more to apartments. It will send most renters to apartments. And the fact is, a large majority of renters are minorities. And I've talked to people online and they say, yeah, renters shouldn't have houses. They should be in apartments. I'm like, do you know what you're saying? Like, we spent decades trying to fix that issue. And now you just want to throw all away because you don't like big investors. So there's a lot of things to consider here. And how will this make housing more expensive? I'll show you here. We're back to the Harvard report. And something interesting that's been happening with big institutional investors is a lot of them have stopped buying as many houses this year because of interest rates are higher. And a lot of this data was from 2022, doesn't include this year's data, which would show a big decrease in purchases, which means probably even fewer single family rentals. But something else big investors started doing is building houses. You hear it all the time. There's a shortage of housing. This own bill will tell you there's a shortage of housing. There aren't enough houses. These big institutions are building rental properties. Are they rentals? Yes, but we've just shown data that shows we need more rentals. Overall, we need more houses. If they're building rentals, that means they're increasing the housing supply. You can see right here, build to rent has gone from 30,000. It's actually fairly high. I don't think people realize that. 40,000 units up to 80,000 units in 2022. Again, that's a tiny percentage compared to how many houses we have. But it's not a tiny percentage compared to all building we have, because we've been building about 1 million single-family homes a year. We need to build way, way more, but the government makes it harder to build, harder to develop, harder to, make new houses. And then they introduce bills like this that say, we need to stop building because, anyway, we could go on for all this stuff for forever. But if there's, this is simple math here, 80,000 homes being built that are build to rent, and 1 million being built total, that's 8%. They're building 8% of single family housing stock right now. That's a pretty big number. They're adding inventory. They're helping housing affordability by adding supply. Basic stuff here. A lot of people can get confused and say, they're buying up all the properties and forcing prices up by making rents go up. No, the more rentals they buy, the more rentals they have, this lower that will push rents down because there's more supply of rentals. The fewer they buy, the fewer rentals they have, the higher rents will go up because of supply and demand. And we've seen it over and over again. What's really pushing prices is owner-occupant purchases. They're the ones buying all the houses right now, not hedge funds. All this anger and is directed at the wrong thing. I'm not blaming owner-occupants either. I think people should buy houses. I think as many people who can buy a house should. I think it's an amazing investment. But stopping hedge funds from building is going to hurt things worse than anything. Stopping them from buying rentals is going to hurt renters a lot more. And it's not going to solve any issues. It's going to decrease the amount of homes being built, which is going to increase prices even more. So this bill will actually increase rents most likely because it decreases the amount of single-family homes. And it will probably increase single-family home pricing because these guys are going to stop building houses, and that's going to decrease inventory as well. I don't see how this bill helps anybody. So again, it's a very contrarian, different point of view than a lot of you might hear, but that's what I see from reality. And just saying, big investors bad, they bought a lot of houses, let's stop them, and not looking deeper into this data is a huge mistake. And unfortunately, how a lot of articles and politics work in our country right now. All right, something else I want to talk about real quick. I mentioned some people almost lying. I don't want to go that far, but really close with data and scaring people. And one of those things I want to talk about that a lot of people use is this Yardi article. Recent research by MetLife Investment Management estimated institutions own some 700,000 single-family rentals, which is way more than we just showed, right, in 2022. And MIM forecast by 2030, investors will increase single-family holdings to 7.6 million homes. So they'll be buying almost 1 million rentals a year, which is insane. They're not doing that. And more than 40% of all SFRs will be owned by institutional investors. So that's not all single-family homes. That's just single-family rentals. So This is a crazy statistic, and people keep talking about how investors are going to own 40% of rentals, big investors, institutions, right? And I dug into this so far. I dug deep trying to find this data, and so you can click on the bulletin that comes from Yardi, and you can download this bulletin. And I know I've downloaded it before, but we'll do that, and then we'll open this bulletin here, and we can read here the same data. And this is what's interesting. Quote, MetLife Investment Management estimated in a recent research paper that institutions own some 700 single-family rentals, 5% of the stock, and forecast by 2030 institutions will increase single-family homes to 7.6 million and more than 40% of all SFRs. So notice there's no link. There's no link in here. There's no notes. There's no footnote. There's nothing from Paul Fiorella, Director of Research at Yardi. No source at all. And so what do? Because I'm annoying like this. I went to MetLife. I messaged William Pattison on LinkedIn. I said, hey, did you guys publish this research paper? I can't find it. It's not on their website anywhere. I searched far and low for this research paper. Guess what he told me? Quote, no, MetLife never published any data that said that. I'm like, what? He's like, we never published a research paper saying that. We never published anything that said that data. He sent that to me in writing. I messaged Paul. He actually responded. Sometimes these guys respond to me, and he wasn't very nice to me. He claimed I was lying. I didn't know what I was talking about. I asked him flat out, do you have a link to the research paper for this data? Wouldn't send it to me, wouldn't respond to my questions. I dug a little deeper, found out how they got this data. Paul and William had lunch together one day. William said, hey, I think there might be 40% ownership of single-family homes. Paul said, great. He put it in his report, claimed there's a research paper about it. That's where this data came from. Literally, all that's in writing. I have it in writing saying they had lunch together, and one guy threw out that number. And that became one of the huge talking points for people about single-family home investors in the U.S. is a lunch date without any research paper at all. And I've messaged Yardi. I've asked them about this. They haven't responded. Crazy. And unfortunately, that's what we deal with in today's media, today's journalism, is stuff like this all the time. So just want to put that out there real fast, yes. And gone through a lot of data, a lot of different things. This Harvard information is fantastic about what's really happening. If you dig into the data, we'll just go over this real quick. Single family rentals are going down, not increasing. Apartments are actually being built at a massive pace right now. We didn't even show that. Everyone talks about record building. Not for houses. There is not record building for houses. There is record building for apartments 20 units or greater. That doesn't include townhomes or condos, just apartments with 20 or more units that can't be sold individually. So there is a serious lack of single family homes. Big institutional investors are actually building 8% of homes right now, which is helping the market and should help affordability. They want to stop that. They want to stop the affordability. They're adding rentals that are needed. They want to stop that. They want to decrease the amount of rentals, which will make rents go up even higher. And a lot of the data they're using is not completely accurate, but really shows when you dig into it, single-family home or hedge funds own a tiny percentage of single-family homes. Maybe that will increase. Maybe that will jump up in the future. Right now, it's a tiny percentage. Yes, some markets have a higher percentage. Those markets probably need rentals too, right? Everyone likes to think that these big bad institutions are killing the American homeowner from buying a house. Well, they're helping a lot of people, including minorities who can't buy, have a house to rent, right? You have to look at both sides. There are renters and owners, both sides. And so this bill has said its goal is to get hedge funds out of minority-owned neighborhoods and cities because they're hurting these minorities by having rental properties there. Well, think about this. Most mom and pops, a lot of mom and pops are selling rental properties. And I sold a lot of my rental properties too. I had 16 at one point, now I'm down to 5. And the reason is it's really, really hard to make rental properties, especially single family homes, make any money right now, right? I'm not going to buy a house for $300,000, $400,000 and rent it for $2,000. That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't cash flow for me. It doesn't make sense for mom and pops. However, it makes sense for some of these hedge funds, their business model, it makes sense for them to be rental property owners with these prices higher. What you're doing is you're discouraging like the groups that want to provide housing and rental property housing, and you think that the mom and pops are just going to pick up this slack and buy these rentals and produce these rental properties for the market. We're not. It doesn't make sense for us unless rents go way up. Unless rents just skyrocket, it makes no sense for mom and pops to buy in most of these markets. And so where these investors are buying, where there are lots of minorities, they want them to sell those houses that are currently housing minorities who might be renting, and they want them to sell them to owner occupants. Now, those minorities can't stay there, they've got to move. So these institutions are supposed to terminate their leases, get those minorities out of those houses, make them ready to sell to owner occupants. Now, who are the owner occupants who are able to buy? Well, according to credit scores and a lot of other data, there's a higher percentage of non-minorities who can buy houses. So what this could typically do is it's taking away houses from minorities who may need to rent at a higher proportion, according to the data, than others, and then saying, sorry, you've got to leave, you've got to find somewhere else to live, maybe it's an apartment, maybe not. We're going to sell it to someone else who's not a minority who can buy it. That's the essence of what's going to happen to this bill. Oh, and because we're decreasing building, and because we're making it harder on investors, prices are probably going to go up for those rents as well. And prices are probably going to go up for houses as well. But don't worry, the evil, bad institutional investors won't be buying anymore, so you should feel good about that. The big issue here isn't who owns these properties or who is buying them, is that we don't have enough of them and we need to build more. If they enact policies that help us build more houses, that's the number one thing they can do to fix affordability and help us out. FHA was created in 1940. We talked about they did some horrible things with redlining and different things. But after the Great Depression, there was a massive shortage of housing in the US. Massive shortage. Guess what FHA and the government did? They gave low interest loans to building. They helped builders develop plans. They helped builders even figure out what the best houses were to build. They encouraged building. They did everything they can to help builders build more houses. They didn't try and stop building, which is what we're doing right now. All right, I think I've talked for long enough. Let me know what you think. And I don't think this bill is going to get passed or go anywhere, but it's very troubling to me how the thinking has shifted based on so much data that is just not correct or blown out of proportion.